Hi, I'm Veda, and if you've ever found yourself holding things together for people who barely remember you exist, then you already know me better than most. I've spent my life standing in the background of someone else's spotlight, the kind of background that's familiar to anyone who's been told they're not enough. Never quite the right shape, never quite the right shine. My name's Veda, and if you've ever been the one holding everything together while someone else got the applause, you'll know exactly where I've been. I was always the sister in the second row. Lila was the golden child. From the moment she could speak in full sentences, she was the one who sparkled at family dinners, straight A student, captain of the debate team, scholarship offers from every university with a name that impressed strangers, and every step of the way, I clapped the loudest. I tried a different path, built my own small business, paid my own way, but it never quite counted in their eyes. Success to my parents came with a diploma from the right place and a job title that sounded good at cocktail parties. They smiled when I visited, but it was the polite kind of smile that never reached their eyes. Still, I stayed connected. It's what family does, right? I sent money when things got tight. I helped Lila with her tuition once when financial aid hit a snag. Nothing major, just enough to cover what my parents couldn't. They never thanked me directly, but my mother's voice was a little softer on the next call. That was enough, or at least I convinced myself it was. When Lila's graduation loomed, my mother mentioned the idea of throwing a party, something tasteful, elegant, but she hesitated at the cost. $850 for the venue, catering, photos. I didn't hesitate. I'll cover it, I said. I told myself it was a gift, a way to celebrate Lila, to show I cared, to maybe, just maybe, feel like part of the family for once. My mother didn't argue. She never does when money is involved. I knew we could count on you, Veda, she said, in that tone that sounds like a compliment but feels like a chore. Lila barely acknowledged it. A quick, thanks, that's cool, before moving on to discuss her dress options. A deep emerald green gown with a slit up the side, custom tailored. I listened as she shared photos of the decorations, the guest list, the food she'd picked. Small plates, past hors d'oeuvres, champagne toast at the end. I wasn't on the guest list. Not officially. But I was family. Surely that meant something. The weeks leading up to the party blurred together, work deadlines, invoices, late nights. But every time I thought about that evening, seeing Lila in her cap and gown, celebrating with the people who mattered to her, I felt something tighten in my chest. Hope, maybe. Foolishness, more likely. I showed up the night of the party in a simple navy dress. Not flashy, not trying to compete, just enough to blend in. The venue was a sleek downtown loft, strings of white lights draped across the ceiling, soft jazz playing in the background. Lila looked stunning, all smiles as she floated from group to group, posing for photos, laughing with friends. I stayed near the edges, close enough to watch, far enough not to intrude. My mother gave me a quick nod when I arrived, then turned back to a conversation with one of Lila's professors. My father didn't even see me. I found myself by the photo backdrop, sipping a glass of sparkling water, watching as Lila posed with her friends. She caught sight of me, then turned back to the photographer. And that's when it happened. She walked over, smiled tight, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen. "This area is for guests, Veda," she said quietly, just enough bite in her voice. "You don't belong here." I froze. The photographer shifted awkwardly. A few heads turned. Lila waved over one of the security guards. "Would you mind escorting her out? She's not on the list." The room tilted. My heartbeat hammered in my chest. I looked at my mother across the room, but she was laughing at something, eyes bright, detached from the scene unfolding at her daughter's celebration. I felt heat rising up my neck. Every instinct told me to shrink, to disappear, to apologize. But not this time. Ever found yourself funding the celebration that kicked you out? There's a unique sting that comes from realizing you've been cast as the outsider in your own story. Standing there, beneath the soft white lights I'd paid for, in the venue I'd booked, I felt the familiar burn of rejection press against my ribs. But rejection wasn't new. I'd worn it for years like a second skin. What made this different was the sharpness of it, the way Lila's words sliced through the air, deliberate and public. "You don't belong here." The phrase echoed in my head, over and over, louder than the muted jazz still playing behind me. The security guard hesitated, glancing between us. He wasn't sure whether to intervene or if this was some family spat best left alone. I looked at him, then at Lila. She smiled, a sweet, practiced curve of her lips that masked the steel in her eyes. "I'm her sister," I said, my voice low, steady. "I paid for this." Lila's smile didn't waver. "That doesn't mean you belong." And there it was, the truth in plain sight. I could have walked away. I could have avoided the scene, spared myself the humiliation. But I stayed, rooted not by pride, but by something deeper, an anger that had been simmering just beneath the surface for too long. This wasn't the first slight, just the most public. I glanced around the room, caught snippets of conversation, guests sipping champagne, laughing, unaware of the storm gathering in the corner. My mother's laughter floated over the hum of voices, carefree and detached. I turned back to Lila. This party wouldn't exist without me. She tilted her head, the silk of her emerald dress catching the light. And that's what family does. You help. Quietly. Quietly. I'd been quiet for years. Quiet when they overlooked me. Quiet when they leaned on me for support without ever acknowledging the weight I carried. Quiet when they paraded Lila's successes as though they had come from nothing but her own brilliance. But quiet wasn't working anymore. I stepped back, brushing past the security guard, who seemed relieved to have dodged the confrontation. I needed air, space to think. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I made my way toward the balcony. The night air hit me sharp and cool, a contrast to the warm flush of my skin. I gripped the railing, the city skyline stretching out before me in glittering defiance of the smallness I felt inside. I thought of the hours I'd spent working extra shifts to cover Lila's tuition shortfall, the sacrifices I made to ensure she never missed out. I thought of the invitations I never received to her milestones, the photos I saw online after the fact, and then I thought of tonight, the final insult. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over the message app. I could have sent a scathing text, could have called my mother or father and demanded an explanation, but none of that would change what had just happened. What I needed wasn't an apology. What I needed was a reckoning. I turned back to the party, the lights softer now, the room somehow smaller. Lila laughed at something a friend said, her hand brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, the same hand that had gestured for me to be removed. A plan began to take shape, not out of spite, but out of necessity. If they wanted to erase me from this celebration, I would erase the celebration itself. Not with yelling, not with scenes, but with the same quiet precision they'd used to cut me out. What would you do if the people who needed you most made sure you always felt invisible? I stood on the balcony longer than I should have, watching the glow of the party reflect in the tall windows like a scene from a life I was never truly part of. The laughter inside sounded muted from out here, distant like I'd already left, but the burn in my chest didn't cool with the night air. Somewhere behind me, a server passed through the sliding doors, tray balanced gracefully with champagne flutes. She glanced at me, offered a polite nod, then vanished back inside. I stayed. Clutching the railing, I let the sharp metal bite into my palms. It grounded me. It reminded me that I was still here, even if Lila wanted me invisible. A voice cut through my thoughts. "You okay?" I turned to find Jordan, one of Lila's college friends, a woman I'd met once before at some family dinner. She leaned casually against the doorframe, sipping from her glass, her dark eyes studying me with a mix of curiosity and something gentler. Pity, maybe. "I'm fine," I said, the lie sliding out too easily. Jordan didn't buy it. She stepped closer, tilting her head. "I saw what happened earlier." I stiffened, forced a smile. "Family, right?" She gave me a look. "That wasn't family, that was something else." I swallowed hard, feeling the sting behind my eyes. "It's fine," I repeated, softer this time. "It's just how things are." Jordan leaned on the railing beside me, her voice lowering. "For what it's worth, you handled that better than I would have." I let out a breath, part gratitude, part exhaustion. "Thanks." She took another sip, then glanced back at the party. "Lila's been telling everyone this is her fresh start. Moving to DC, starting the next chapter. Sounds like she's leaving a few things behind." The words felt heavier than she intended. I nodded, silent. Jordan lingered a moment longer, then gave me a soft pat on the shoulder and disappeared back inside, leaving me with the weight of her observation. I wasn't just being left out of this party, I was being left behind. Again. The sliding doors whispered shut behind me as I re-entered the venue. The air felt warmer, thicker. Music pulsed soft and steady beneath the chatter. I watched Lila working the room, grinning wide, arms linked with friends, parents circling like satellites. I moved toward the back, found the catering manager stationed near the bar, clipboard in hand. "Hi," I said, my voice calm, even. "I need to make some changes." She glanced up, polite but distracted. "Of course, are you with the family?" "I'm the one who booked the event," I said, and she blinked, registering my name. Her posture shifted. "Is there an issue?" I leaned in slightly, lowered my voice. "I'd like to settle the bill now and close out early." She blinked again, uncertain. "We're scheduled until midnight." "I know," I said, smile thin, "but I've decided the party ends in 20 minutes. I'll cover the full balance, including gratuity, but I want everything wrapped." Her eyes flicked toward the crowd, sensing the tension, even if she didn't know the whole story. "Is there something I just need this done quietly," I said, steady. We stopped serving, no more drinks, no more food. Lights down, music off. She hesitated, then nodded. "We can do that." I handed over my card, watched as she keyed in the numbers. The total flashed on the screen. $850 plus tip. My chest tightened, but not with regret. This wasn't about the money. This was about ending the game they thought they were winning. 20 minutes later, the first ripple of confusion spread through the room. Guests wandered toward the bar, only to find it shuttered. Trays of hors d'oeuvres vanished. The music faded into an awkward silence. Overhead lights dimmed, leaving the space softer, emptier. Lila turned, her smile faltering. She scanned the room, eyes narrowing as she took in the sudden shift. Her gaze landed on me. "What's going on?" she called across the room. I stepped forward, letting the quiet fall around me. "Looks like the party's over," I said, my voice calm but carrying. She strode toward me, her heels clicking sharp against the floor. "What did you do?" I tilted my head, meeting her glare head-on. "I ended it." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Around us, guests murmured, shifting uncomfortably. Someone slipped out the door. "I'm going to fix this," she hissed under her breath. I smiled, soft, unshaken. "Go ahead, but you'll be footing the bill for whatever comes next." Her eyes flashed, realization sinking in. She turned toward our parents, who stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. "I hope your new life in DC treats you better than you've treated the people who helped you get there," I said. I watched as the final threads of her composure frayed, but I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I simply turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the room behind. What happens when the person you've dismissed holds all the power? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, the city lights flickering through the half-closed blinds, shadows crawling across my ceiling like restless thoughts. The scene replayed again and again, the fading music, the confusion rippling through the room, Lila's face as realization set in, the moment the weight shifted. I wasn't the one left out anymore. I had turned the tables, and yet that knot in my chest tightened instead of loosening. This wasn't how I imagined claiming space for myself. But maybe space was never given. Maybe it was taken. My phone lit up around 6 a.m., a text from my mother. That was uncalled for. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what led to it. Just those 4 words, as if I'd broken some silent family code. I stared at the screen, the urge to respond rising fast and hot. But I didn't. I let the silence sit between us. By noon, the calls started. My father left a voicemail, his voice low, controlled. "Veda, call me back, we need to talk." There was no we in this. There never had been. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into the event payment portal, reviewed every charge, the floral arrangements, the catering, the venue deposit, the balance was cleared, all of it done under my name. But those details had never mattered to them. I closed the laptop, exhaled. The message from Lila came later that afternoon. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. I hope you're happy." I let out a breathless laugh, dry and humorless. Happy? That wasn't the word. Satisfied, maybe, but no, not even that. There was something hollow where the satisfaction should have settled. I typed back. "I covered your tuition when Mom and Dad couldn't. I funded that entire party, and you still told me I didn't belong. I just made sure you felt what it's like to stand where I've stood. I didn't wait for a response. I knew the silence that followed would scream louder than anything she could write, but the quiet didn't last long. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment. I didn't answer the door at first. I stood behind it, listening as she knocked again, soft but insistent. "Veda," she called, voice carefully measured. "We need to talk about what happened." I opened the door slowly, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. She stepped back, smoothing the crease of her blouse. Always so composed, always in control. "You didn't have to do that," she said, eyes searching my face for something familiar. I held her gaze. "But you did." Her jaw tensed. "Lila was celebrating an achievement. You turned it into something ugly." I let the words sit between us, heavy and deliberate. "I didn't make it ugly. You let it be." She opened her mouth to argue, but I shook my head. "I paid for everything that night," I continued, voice steady. "Every dollar. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't expect a speech or a thank you, but I deserved not to be treated like I didn't exist." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You overreacted." There it was. The final defense. When all else failed, make me the problem. I took a step back. "You've spent years pretending I'm invisible until you need something. Well, this time I made sure you saw me." She blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness in my tone. Maybe for the first time she realized I wasn't slipping back into my role. "I won't apologize for that," I finished, pushing the door closed gently but firmly. That night I sat at my desk, scrolling through photos of the party that had already started to circulate online. Guests awkwardly holding drinks, unsure whether to stay or leave as the music faded. Lila's strained smile as she tried to salvage what she could. I didn't share my side publicly, not yet. But the idea was there, stirring quietly beneath the surface. Have you ever been blamed for standing up after being pushed too far? The thing about silence is that it doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it amplifies everything you've tried to bury, makes it louder in the spaces where no one else is listening. The fallout from the party had settled like dust on glass, thin enough that it almost looked invisible, but still there, clinging to everything. Lila had stopped texting. My mother hadn't tried again after the doorstep conversation, but the weight of everything unsaid still hovered over me, thick and restless. I didn't want this silence to speak for me, not anymore, so I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on an empty page, daring me to fill it. I hesitated. Was this petty, self-serving? The questions came fast, the doubts I'd been trained to feel whenever I stepped out of line. But beneath that, steadier and quieter, was the certainty that if I didn't tell the truth, someone else would twist it. They already had. I began to type. Family is supposed to be the place you belong, but sometimes it's the place that breaks you the most. This is my story. I wrote about the graduation party, not the logistics, not the food or the music, but the feeling of standing on the outside looking in, of giving and giving until you start to wonder if you exist only for what you can offer. I wrote about Lila, how I covered her tuition when she fell short, how I never asked for recognition. I wrote about the moment she had security ready to remove me from the very party I'd funded. I paid for every moment of that evening, and still, I wasn't allowed to be part of it. But I didn't stop there. I wrote about the years before, the birthdays missed because I wasn't invited, the calls only made when money was tight. I laid out the pattern, not in anger, but in truth. I didn't post it right away. I sat with it, reread it, let it breathe. The next morning I clicked publish. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't call them out by name, but the people who needed to see it knew exactly who they were, and the responses came faster than I expected. Some were strangers who'd felt the same thing. I've been there. I know this pain. Others were quieter, sharing stories of their own invisibility, their own betrayals. And a few, well, they pushed back. You should have handled this privately. Air your dirty laundry in private, but none of them lived my life. None of them stood where I had stood. I sat back watching as the thread wove itself through the feeds of people I didn't know, connecting the invisible in ways I never imagined. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Jordan, Lila's college friend, the one who'd found me on the balcony that night. "I saw your post. I just want you to know. People noticed. They saw what she did. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight in my chest shift. Thank you, I typed back, but she wasn't done. There are people talking. She's trying to spin it, saying you snapped out of jealousy. Of course she was. I sighed, fingers hovering over the keys. She can spin it however she wants. The truth's already out. A few days later, Lila finally broke her silence. She sent me a text that I read 3 times before I believed it was real. I didn't mean for it to go that far. You made me look bad. I laughed, bitter and tired. You did that all by yourself, I wrote back. Her reply came quick. Why couldn't you just let it go? I stared at those words, the audacity of them. The years I'd let things go, the moments I'd swallowed, the lines I'd erased just to keep the peace. And I knew I wasn't going back. I didn't respond. The next morning, I made one final call, to the venue. I'm following up on the event, I said. I'd like to redirect the deposit for next year's booking. The woman on the other end paused. Of course. Any special instructions? Yes, I said, smiling. Apply it to the scholarship fund your company supports. The one for first-generation college students. Make it anonymous. There was a beat of silence. That's really generous. I'll take care of it. Thank you, I said. I just want to make sure it goes to someone who knows what it means to be seen. When the truth is finally told, do you think it really sets you free, or just shows who was never ready to hear it? It was almost funny how long it took Lila to call. I'd half expected her to storm into my apartment or send one of those long, guilt-laden messages about family ties and how we could work this out if I just dropped the act. But she held back. Or maybe she was strategizing. When her name finally flashed on my screen, I let it ring twice before answering. Veda. Her voice came through tight, controlled, like she was rehearsing every word. We need to meet. I leaned back in my chair, eyes flicking toward the window where the city blurred beneath the evening haze. I think we've said everything we needed to. I'm not doing this over the phone. There was a slight crack beneath her calm. In person, please. It was the please that caught me off guard, a word she rarely used with me. But this wasn't about manners, it was about image. She couldn't afford to lose control of the narrative. Not now. I agreed. We settled on a small cafe, neutral ground. I picked the time, midday, when the place would be half full with people on laptops and lunch breaks. I wanted witnesses, even if they didn't know what they were witnessing. When I arrived, Lila was already there, perched at a corner table. She wore a blazer, intentional, strategic, dress for authority. Her posture screamed confidence, but her fingers tapped nervously against her coffee cup. I sat across from her without a word. You've made quite the mess, she started, voice clipped. I smiled softly. You mean I told the truth? Her jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. You humiliated me. I told my story, I replied. If that humiliated you, maybe you need to ask why. She exhaled sharply, leaning in, lowering her voice. You've ruined things for me. Do you know how many people reached out after that post? I have interviews lined up, Veda. Real jobs, real opportunities. They're asking questions now. I studied her face, the desperation behind the anger. And I'm supposed to care because? Her eyes flashed. Because you're my sister. I laughed, soft, but it hit hard. That's rich coming from the woman who called security on me at her own party. That was a mistake, she said quickly, brushing it aside. I lost my temper. You shouldn't have been standing there. I cut her off. Standing where? In a space I paid for? With money you were happy to take when you needed it but too proud to acknowledge? She sank back slightly, as if the weight of my words pressed into her chest. I'm not here to fight, she said, softening her tone. I'm trying to fix this. No, I shook my head. You're trying to salvage what's left of your image. For a moment she said nothing. Her fingers stilled against the coffee cup, and the cracks began to show. She was losing the grip she'd spent years perfecting. Do you know what it's like to have everyone think you're the bad guy? Her voice broke just a little. I leaned in, eyes steady. I know exactly what that feels like. She blinked, absorbing the weight of my words, and for a moment I thought she might actually get it. That maybe there was a sliver of understanding beneath all that self-preservation. But then she straightened, masking it again. You need to take that post down. I smiled, slow and steady. No. Her lips parted, but I kept going. You don't get to erase this. You don't get to rewrite it. For once, you sit with it. She pushed back her chair, frustration rippling through her. Fine, but you'll regret this. We're still family. I stood too, sliding my bag onto my shoulder. You've mistaken blood for loyalty, Lila. They're not the same. I left her there, the cafe bustling around her, none of them knowing who she was, none of them caring. 3 days later, I heard from Jordan again. Your sister's losing contacts fast. Words out about the party, about what she did. Some of her internship offers are pulling back. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar twist in my gut. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about consequences, the kind that finally stuck. I typed back slowly. She made her choices. People are saying she's struggling financially. Parents aren't helping like before. That gave me pause. For a moment, I felt the old tug of guilt, that ingrained reflex to make things right, to smooth things over, but I breathed through it. It's not my job to clean up her mess, I wrote back. Is holding your ground ever harder when the person who hurt you finally starts to fall apart? The thing about endings is that they rarely feel neat. You imagine a final conversation, a moment of closure, something cinematic, but life doesn't give you that. It gives you unfinished sentences, messages left unread, silence where you once expected noise, and I was learning to be okay with that. Weeks passed. The dust settled, but not completely. The post I'd written continued to circulate, quiet ripples through feeds and timelines, drawing out stories from people I'd never met, people who'd stood in the same shadows I had. Some reached out to thank me. Some shared their own versions of betrayal, and some told me I was wrong. But the important thing was I had told my truth, not to convince anyone, not even to hurt anyone, just to set myself free. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with the city humming beneath me, my phone buzzed again. I almost didn't check it, but curiosity won. It was Lila. The message was short, clipped. I know you probably won't respond, but I'm sorry for everything. I didn't think it would get this bad. I stared at it, feeling the old reflexes stir, the part of me that wanted to reach out, to fix it, to make it easier for both of us. But then I remembered standing by the photo backdrop, being told I didn't belong. I remembered the years of giving without recognition, and I realized this wasn't about fixing anything, not anymore. I locked my phone. No reply. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I navigated to the scholarship funds page where my donations still sat quietly, helping fuel opportunities for students who needed a hand up. I added to it, not because I needed to feel good about myself, but because giving on my own terms felt different. It felt right. Later that week, I received an invitation from the scholarship board. They were hosting a small reception for donors to meet some of the students whose lives were impacted by the fund. I almost said no. Part of me still wanted to stay small, to slip back into the background, but I went. The event wasn't grand, no chandeliers or champagne flutes, just folding chairs, handshakes, and stories. Real stories. One student, a young woman named Amara, shared how the scholarship helped her cover tuition when her parents cut her off for choosing her own path. As she spoke, I felt something shift inside me. Not vindication, not pride, but a quiet peace. I wasn't just walking away from my family's expectations. I was walking towards something else, something I got to build piece by piece. That night, standing again on my balcony, the city stretching wide and alive beneath me, I felt lighter. Not because I'd won some battle, not because I'd watched Lila falter, but because I'd stopped needing to be seen by the people who refused to look. I closed my eyes, let the breeze lift the weight from my chest. I wasn't the sister in the second row anymore. I was right where I belonged. Sometimes the people who see you best are the ones you've never met. Have you ever found family outside of the ones you were born into?